For over 100,000 years, humans couldn't stop moving. We walked out of Africa, crossed deserts, climbed mountains, navigated oceans, and spread to every corner of the earth. We were the ultimate nomads, never staying in one place, always chasing the horizon. Then suddenly, around 12,000 years ago, something changed. Humans stopped. After millennia of constant migration, of endless wandering, of pushing into every new territory we could find, we just settled down. We stopped moving. And this decision, this moment when our ancestors chose to stay in one place instead of continuing their endless journey, changed everything about human civilization. But here's the mystery that archaeologists and anthropologists are still trying to solve. Why? What made humans, after thousands of generations of nomadic life, suddenly decide that staying put was better than moving on? And what consequences did this decision have for the entire future of our species? Today we're going to explore one of the most pivotal and least understood transitions in human history. The moment when wanderers became settlers, when nomads became farmers, when temporary camps became permanent villages, and those villages eventually became the cities and civilizations we know today. This isn't just ancient history. This is the story of how human society as we know it was born. And the reasons behind it are far more complex, far more fascinating, and far more controversial than you might imagine. To the endless journey. Let's start by understanding just how deeply migration was embedded in human nature. For the vast majority of human existence, staying in one place wasn't just unusual, it was impossible. Our ancestors were hunter-gatherers, following animal herds, tracking seasonal plant growth, moving constantly in search of food and water. This wasn't casual wandering, this was survival. If you stayed too long in one place, you depleted the resources, the animals moved on, the plants were harvested, and you had no choice but to follow. Picture this, a band of early humans, maybe 30 or 40 individuals, including children and elders, moving through a landscape that's both beautiful and deadly. They know this territory intimately, every water source, every fruit tree, every good hunting ground. But they also know they can't stay. The seasons are changing, the herds are migrating. In a few weeks, there won't be enough food to sustain the group. So they pack up their few possessions, mainly tools and weapons made from stone and bone, and they start walking. They might cover 10 miles in a day, sometimes more. The children complain, the elders struggle, but everyone understands this is necessary. This pattern repeated for thousands of generations. Humans were extraordinarily good at it. We evolved to be long-distance walkers, capable of covering vast distances that would exhaust most other animals. Our ability to sweat efficiently meant we could travel during the day when other predators rested. Our intelligence meant we could plan routes, remember locations, and communicate about resources. Migration wasn't just what we did, it was who we were. And this lifestyle took us everywhere. Starting in Africa around 200,000 years ago, modern humans began spreading outward. By 60,000 years ago, we'd reached Australia, crossing open ocean in boats we can only speculate about. By 40,000 years ago, we were in Europe, competing with Neanderthals for resources. By 15,000 years ago, we'd crossed into the Americas, probably via a land bridge that connected Siberia to Alaska during the Ice Age. Every inhabitable continent on Earth, every climate zone from Arctic tundra to tropical rainforest, humans had reached and adapted to. We were the most successful migratory species in the planet's history. But then, after over 100,000 years of this nomadic lifestyle, after spreading across the entire world, after proving we could survive anywhere as long as we kept moving, something remarkable happened. Around 12,000 years ago, in several different places around the world, humans started staying put. They built permanent structures, they planted seeds and waited months for harvest. They stored food instead of just consuming it immediately. They developed pottery to hold grain and water. They domesticated animals to keep them close instead of hunting them from a distance. In short, they stopped being nomads and became settlers. The Fertile Crescent, where it all began. The story of why humans stopped migrating can't be told without talking about the Fertile Crescent, that arc of land stretching from the Persian Gulf through modern-day Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Israel, and into Egypt. This region, often called the cradle of civilization, was where the transition from nomadic to settled life first took hold in a major way. But what made this place special? Why here? Why then? The answer starts with the end of the last ice age. Around 15,000 years ago, Earth's climate began warming dramatically. The massive ice sheets covering much of North America and Europe started melting. Sea levels rose, weather patterns shifted, and in the Fertile Crescent, conditions became almost perfect for a new way of life. The region had an unusual concentration of wild grasses, the ancestors of wheat and barley, and wild animals like sheep, goats, and cattle that could potentially be domesticated. The climate was Mediterranean, with wet winters and dry summers, perfect for annual grasses that produced abundant seeds. Imagine being a hunter-gatherer in this region around 10,000 BCE. For generations, your people have been following the usual pattern, moving seasonally, hunting gazelles and wild cattle, gathering nuts, fruits, and the seeds of wild grasses. But you're noticing something interesting. These wild wheat and barley stands are incredibly productive. In a good year, a small band of people can gather enough seeds in a few weeks to sustain them for months. And the stands grow in the same places every year, in valleys with reliable water sources. At first, your group probably just extended their stays at these locations. Instead of moving on after a few days or weeks, you stayed for months, building more substantial shelters, coming back to the same spots year after year. These weren't permanent settlements yet, but they were semi-permanent camps. Archaeologists call this the Natufian culture, named after a valley where evidence of this lifestyle was first discovered. The Natufians built stone structures, buried their dead in cemeteries, implying territorial connection to specific places, and made sickles with stone blades for harvesting wild grains. They were on the edge of settlement, 1 foot still in the nomadic past, 1 foot stepping toward a settled future. But here's where it gets really interesting. Staying longer in one place created new pressures and new opportunities. When you're nomadic, you can only own what you can carry. When you're semi-sedentary, you can accumulate possessions, store food, build more comfortable shelters. But you're also more vulnerable. If the harvest fails, if the water source dries up, if disease strikes, you can't just move on as easily. You've invested too much in this location, so you need insurance. You need to make sure the food supply is reliable. And the best way to ensure that is to control the food supply directly. To plant seeds deliberately instead of just harvesting wild stands. To keep animals corralled instead of hunting them. To become, in other words, farmers. To the agricultural revolution, trap or triumph? Now we need to address one of the most controversial questions in all of archaeology and anthropology. Was the shift from nomadic hunting and gathering to settled agriculture actually good for humans? For most of history, the answer seemed obvious. Of course it was good. Agriculture allowed food surpluses, which allowed population growth, which allowed specialization of labor, which allowed technological advancement, which eventually led to writing, cities, science, and everything we call civilization. Agriculture was progress. Settlement was evolution. Moving from nomadic to settled life was moving from primitive to advanced. But modern archaeology has revealed a much more complicated picture. In many ways, early farmers were less healthy than their hunter-gatherer ancestors. Their diets became less diverse, dependent on a few staple crops. Their bones show signs of malnutrition and deficiency diseases that hunter-gatherers rarely suffered. They were shorter on average. Dental problems increased dramatically as carbohydrate-heavy diets caused tooth decay. And because they lived in permanent settlements with domesticated animals, they were exposed to new diseases. Zoonotic diseases, illnesses that jump from animals to humans, became much more common. Measles, smallpox, influenza, and countless other scourges of human history emerged from close contact with livestock. Not only that, but early farmers worked harder than hunter-gatherers. Despite romantic notions of simple, easy agricultural life, actual farming is backbreaking labor. Clearing fields, planting, weeding, harvesting, processing grain, storing it, protecting it from pests and thieves. The workload was immense. Archaeological evidence suggests that early farmers worked longer hours, and had less leisure time than nomadic hunter-gatherers. So why did they do it? If farming made you less healthy, required more work, and exposed you to more disease, why would anyone choose that life over the relative freedom and ease of hunting and gathering? Some anthropologists have called agriculture a trap. The idea is that once you start down the path of settlement in farming, you can't easily turn back. Agriculture allows higher population density. A square mile of farmed land can support far more people than a square mile of wild landscape being hunted and gathered. So farming communities grow larger. But this means you need more farmland to feed everyone. So you clear more land, plant more crops, and your population grows further. Soon you have so many people dependent on agriculture that reverting to nomadic hunting and gathering isn't an option anymore. There aren't enough wild resources to support that many people. You're trapped in the agricultural lifestyle, whether it's better for you or not. But there's another perspective. Maybe early humans didn't choose agriculture for practical reasons at all. Maybe the decision to stop migrating and settle down was cultural, social, even spiritual. Some archaeologists point to sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, a massive complex of carved stone pillars arranged in circles, built around 11,000 years ago by people who were apparently still mostly hunter-gatherers. This wasn't a settlement, it was a temple, a gathering place, possibly used for seasonal ceremonies and feasts. The effort required to build it was enormous, suggesting that people were coming together in large groups regularly, which requires coordination and planning beyond typical nomadic bands. Perhaps religion, ritual, and the desire to create permanent sacred spaces motivated settlement as much as practical concerns about food supply. Climate change in the Younger Dryas. But we can't ignore the role of climate in this story, because just as humans in the Fertile Crescent were beginning to experiment with settlement and early agriculture, the climate threw them a curveball. Around 10,800 BCE, Earth's warming trends suddenly reversed. Temperatures plummeted back toward Ice Age conditions in an event called the Younger Dryas, named after a flower that thrives in cold conditions and whose pollen suddenly reappears in the geological record from this time. For over 1,000 years, the climate was cold and dry, with much less rainfall in many regions. This climatic disaster would have devastated the early experiments in settlement. Wild plant stands that had been reliable for generations suddenly failed. Animal populations crashed. Water sources dried up. For people who had started to depend on staying in one place, this must have been catastrophic. And here's where things get really interesting from an archaeological perspective. Some communities abandoned settlement and returned to fully nomadic lifestyles, but others doubled down on agriculture. They started deliberately planting and irrigating crops to compensate for the unreliable wild resources. They intensified their control over animal populations, fully domesticating species like sheep and goats. In the face of climate crisis, they didn't retreat from settlement, they accelerated it. Why? Perhaps because by this point, they didn't have a choice. Their populations had grown too large to support through hunting and gathering alone. Perhaps because they'd already invested so much in their settlements, built houses, cleared fields, created social structures tied to specific places, that abandoning everything was too costly. Or perhaps because the crisis spurred innovation, forcing them to figure out more intensive agricultural techniques that eventually made settled life not just viable, but superior to nomadic life in terms of food security. Whatever the reasons, by the time the Younger Dryas ended around 9,600 BCE and the climate warmed again, agriculture and settlement were firmly established in the Fertile Crescent. Within a few thousand years, villages grew into towns, towns grew into cities, and the first civilization in human history, Sumer in Mesopotamia, emerged around 3,500 BCE with writing, complex government, and monumental architecture. The decision to stop migrating had changed humanity forever. Independent invention around the world. Here's something crucial to understand. The shift from nomadic to settled life didn't just happen once in the Fertile Crescent. It happened independently in multiple places around the world at roughly the same time in human history. In China, around the Yellow River and Yangtze River valleys, people were domesticating rice and millet around 9,000 years ago. In Mesoamerica, groups were cultivating maize, beans, and squash around the same period. In the Andes of South America, potatoes and quinoa were being domesticated. In New Guinea, people were developing agriculture based on bananas and taro. In sub-Saharan Africa, sorghum and yams were cultivated. Each region had different crops, different animals, different environmental conditions, but the pattern was the same. After thousands of years of nomadic life, humans started settling down. This parallel development is remarkable and tells us something important. The transition to settled life wasn't a historical accident that happened once and spread. It was a response to conditions that emerged in multiple places independently. What were those conditions? Climate stabilization after the Ice Age is one factor. As climates became more predictable and temperate zones expanded, the potential for agriculture increased. Population pressure is another. As humans became more successful at hunting and gathering, populations grew, and nomadic lifestyles became harder to sustain, with larger groups competing for the same resources. But there's also a fascinating chicken and egg question here. Did humans settle down because they started farming, or did they start farming because they had already begun settling down for other reasons? The evidence isn't entirely clear and might vary from place to place. In some regions, it looks like semi-permanent settlements came first, with agriculture developing later to support them. In others, the cultivation of crops seems to have enabled or encouraged settlement. It's probably not a simple linear progression, but a complex feedback loop where each reinforced the other. Here's the cost of stopping. Let's talk about what humanity gained and lost when we stopped moving. The gains are obvious and massive. Settled agricultural life enabled food surpluses, which freed some people from the constant work of food acquisition. This allowed specialization. You could have full-time craftspeople, priests, administrators, warriors. You could accumulate knowledge and possessions across generations. You could build monumental architecture. You could develop writing systems to record information. Everything we associate with civilization flows from the decision to settle down. But the losses were real too, and we're only beginning to appreciate them fully. Hunter-gatherers had to know their environment intimately. They were expert botanists, zoologists, meteorologists, navigators. Their knowledge of the natural world was encyclopedic because their lives depended on it. When humans settled down and focused on a few domesticated crops and animals, that broad knowledge began to narrow. We gained depth in agricultural knowledge but lost breadth in understanding wild ecosystems. Hunter-gatherers also had to be egalitarian by necessity. In nomadic groups, no one can accumulate much more than anyone else, because you can only own what you can carry. Leadership is based on skill and consensus, rather than inherited power. Archaeological evidence from hunter-gatherer sites shows relatively equal burials with similar grave goods. But settled agricultural societies quickly developed inequality. Those who controlled more land, more stored surplus, more resources gained power over others. We start seeing wealthy burials alongside poor ones. We see defensive walls around settlements, suggesting organized warfare to protect or capture resources. We see evidence of slavery and forced labor. Hierarchy, inequality, and organized violence all increase dramatically with settlement. There's also the question of happiness and quality of life. This is harder to measure archaeologically, but some anthropologists who've studied modern hunter-gatherer societies before they were disrupted by agriculture report that nomadic life, while certainly having its hardships, also had considerable advantages. Hunter-gatherers typically work fewer hours per day than farmers, have more leisure time, have more varied and nutritious diets, and have stronger social bonds. The assumption that agricultural settlement represents unambiguous progress may be more ideological than factual. Göbekli Tepe, the mystery that changes everything. We need to talk about Göbekli Tepe because this archaeological site in southeastern Turkey has upended many of our assumptions about why humans stopped migrating. Discovered in the 1990s and excavated over the past few decades, Göbekli Tepe is a massive complex of stone pillars arranged in circles, many decorated with intricate carvings of animals and abstract symbols. The mind-blowing part? It dates to around 9,500 BCE, making it one of the oldest known monumental constructions in human history. Here's why this matters. Göbekli Tepe was built before agriculture was fully established in the region. The people who constructed it were apparently still primarily hunter-gatherers. They hadn't yet fully settled into permanent villages. Yet they created a structure that would have required hundreds of people working together over many years. The pillars weigh multiple tons and had to be quarried, transported, and erected without metal tools or draft animals. This was a massive communal effort by people who, according to traditional theories, shouldn't have been capable of organizing at that scale. What was Göbekli Tepe? Most archaeologists believe it was a ritual center, a temple complex where hunter-gatherer groups from a wide region gathered for ceremonies, feasts, and possibly ancestor worship. But if that's true, it suggests that religion and ritual might have been a driving force behind settlement, not just a consequence of it. Perhaps humans started gathering regularly at places like Göbekli Tepe for spiritual reasons, and those gatherings required semi-permanent presence to maintain the site, provide food for pilgrims, and organize the rituals. Perhaps, in other words, we built temples before we built cities. Perhaps the sacred came before the practical. This flips the traditional narrative on its head. Instead of agriculture-enabled surplus, surplus-enabled specialization, specialization-enabled monumental architecture and religion, the sequence might be religious and social needs brought groups together regularly. This required more intensive food production. Agriculture developed to meet those needs, and settlement followed. We didn't stop migrating because farming made us settle down. We started farming because we'd already decided for other reasons that we wanted to stay together in permanent communities. Conclusion: the moment that made us. As we come to the end of this journey through one of history's most pivotal transitions, let's reflect on what the decision to stop migrating really means. For over 100,000 years, humans were defined by movement. We were explorers, wanderers, nomads following the horizon. Then, in a relatively brief period, around 10 to 12,000 years ago, that changed. We became settlers. We became farmers. We became builders of permanent places. And that decision set in motion everything that followed. Cities, writing, empires, technology, everything we call civilization. But why did it happen? We've explored multiple theories. Climate change at the end of the Ice Age created new opportunities and pressures. Population growth made nomadic lifestyles increasingly difficult to sustain. The discovery of agriculture provided a way to support larger populations in smaller areas. Religious and social motivations brought people together in permanent gathering places. Perhaps all of these factors worked together, reinforcing each other in a complex feedback loop that pulled humans inexorably toward settled life. What's clear is that the transition wasn't simple, wasn't instant, and wasn't universally beneficial in all ways. Early farmers were often less healthy than their hunter-gatherer ancestors. They worked harder, lived in more crowded and disease-prone conditions, and experienced new forms of social inequality and conflict. But they also built societies that could support far more people, accumulate knowledge across generations, and eventually develop the technologies that shape our modern world. The mystery of why humans stopped migrating is really a question about who we are as a species. Are we naturally nomadic, with settlement being an unnatural state we've imposed on ourselves? Or are we naturally adaptable, capable of thriving in both mobile and settled lifestyles depending on circumstances? The answer probably lies somewhere in between. We carry within us both the wanderer and the builder, the explorer and the farmer, the nomad who longs for the horizon, and the settler who finds meaning in place. Today in our modern world, we see both impulses playing out. We live in permanent structures, work in the same locations for years, develop deep attachments to places we call home. But we also travel, explore, move for opportunities, experience wanderlust. We've built a civilization based on settlement, but we haven't entirely lost that ancient nomadic spirit that carried our ancestors across the world. The 10,000 years since humans stopped migrating have seen incredible changes. The rise and fall of empires, the development of science and technology, the transformation of the planet itself. But in many ways, we're still living with the consequences of that ancient decision. The way we organize societies, the way we think about property and territory, the way we relate to each other and to the land, all of this flows from the moment our ancestors chose to stop moving and build permanent homes. And perhaps the greatest mystery isn't why they stopped migrating, but what was lost when they did. What knowledge, what ways of seeing the world, what human possibilities disappeared when we traded endless horizons for fixed boundaries. We'll never fully know because those nomadic cultures are mostly gone, their wisdom lost, except for echoes preserved by the few remaining nomadic peoples today. The story of why humans stopped migrating is ultimately a story about choices made thousands of years ago that still shape our lives today, choices between different visions of what human life should be, choices that had both benefits and costs that we're still grappling with. And as we face our own pivotal choices about humanity's future, how we'll live, how we'll organize societies, how we'll relate to our planet, maybe understanding this ancient transition can help us see more clearly what we might be gaining and what we might be losing with each path we choose.